They say true leadership isn't about the uniform you wear, but what you do when no one's watching. Today's story will challenge what you think you know about power, respect, and the moment everything changes. Imagine walking into a room where no one sees your worth until it's too late. That's exactly what happened when a man in worn-out clothes entered a police station and was spit on by the very people he was about to lead. But before we dive into this powerful true story, a quick question for you. What time are you watching this? Morning, night, midnight scroll? And let us know in the comments, which country are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. If you love meaningful, emotional stories that reveal the truth behind the badge, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss what comes next. Now, let's begin. Jerome Carter pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of the Lakebridge Police Department just after 7 a.m. The summer sun had only begun to rise, casting pale orange streaks across the low buildings and chain-link fences. From the outside, the precinct looked like any other small-town station. Ordinary, unremarkable. But Jerome wasn't here for how it looked. He was here for how it felt, when no one thought they were being watched. He cut the engine of his old gray sedan, a car far beneath the status of a newly appointed police chief. The dashboard was cracked, the upholstery faded and torn, and the faint smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. It was perfect, unremarkable, just like he needed to be. He caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. 3 days stubble, tired eyes, a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. No badge, no name tag, no suit. He looked like a man people might ignore, maybe even dismiss. And that was exactly the point. For over 2 decades, Jerome had worked his way up through the ranks. Patrol, investigations, internal affairs. He'd seen corruption, witnessed loyalty twisted into silence, and watched good officers walk away while bad ones thrived in the shadows. So when he accepted the position of chief in Lakebridge, a department plagued with quiet scandals and louder denials, he knew what he was stepping into. And he knew he couldn't trust first impressions or pre-arranged tours and polished welcome. He had to see it raw. No filters, no masks, no one knowing he was the man now in charge. Jerome hadn't told anyone about his plan, not his deputy, not City Hall. He needed to feel what a civilian might feel walking into that building, vulnerable, unsure, unimportant. He opened the door and stepped out into the morning heat. The sound of idle chatter drifted through the air as uniformed officers loitered by their patrol cars, some smoking, some laughing, others scrolling their phones. He walked slowly across the lot, head down, back slightly hunched. Just another guy. No one paid him much attention. At least, not at first. "Hey, you lost or just looking for trouble?" a voice called out behind him. Jerome turned. A tall, broad-shouldered officer in mirrored sunglasses was approaching him from across the lot. The man's uniform was crisp, but his tone was anything but professional. "I'm just," Jerome began, his voice even. But the officer cut him off. "This is a restricted area. You can't just wander in here like you own the place." Jerome held his ground. "I'm not causing any harm, just looking for someone." The officer smirked. "Yeah? Well, you found me. Now turn around and walk back to wherever the hell you came from." 2 other officers nearby glanced up from their conversation, smirking, but said nothing. Jerome didn't move. His eyes remained steady. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks in?" That seemed to strike a nerve. The officer stepped closer. Far too close. "You think I'm joking with you?" he hissed. "You want to act like a smartass in here? You better learn real quick who runs this place." Then it happened. Without warning, the officer spit in Jerome's face. The world froze for a heartbeat. The warm trail of saliva ran down Jerome's cheek. One of the officers behind the aggressor let out a wheezing laugh. The other snorted, shaking his head. Their amusement filled the air like static. Jerome stood motionless. Not a single muscle flinched. Instead, he slowly reached into his back pocket, pulled out a cloth handkerchief and wiped his face, calmly, deliberately. His pulse thudded in his ears, but his expression remained unreadable. He looked the officer directly in the eye. "What's your name?" he asked. The officer straightened. "Barnes. Officer Barnes." Got a problem with that? Jerome gave a single nod. Not at all, just making a note. Then he turned and walked away. The laughter died as he moved toward the entrance of the building. The moment felt heavier than the heat pressing down on the lot. The officers watched him go, a few with smirks still lingering, others now wearing something closer to curiosity. Jerome didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had already seen enough. This wasn't just a rude officer with a bad attitude. It was a culture, one that felt empowered to humiliate, dismiss, and degrade anyone who didn't look the part. And it was thriving out in the open, in broad daylight, with an audience. Exactly what Jerome had suspected. Exactly what he had come to confront. He reached the building's side entrance, buzzed himself in with a generic visitor pass, and slipped through the door as if he had every right to be there. Because in truth he did. And soon, everyone in that building would know it. Jerome Carter moved through the narrow corridors of the Lakebridge Police Department with quiet intent. The building was a maze of fluorescent lights, scuffed linoleum floors, and tired paint peeling slightly at the corners. The smell of burnt coffee and overused disinfectant hung in the air like an unspoken warning. It was everything he'd expected. But he wasn't here to judge the walls. He was here to judge the people inside them. As he walked, he took mental notes. A desk left cluttered with half-finished reports, a locker slightly ajar with a beer sticker on the inside, the tone of conversations that filtered through the walls, some professional, others laced with sarcasm and dismissal. Jerome kept his head low and posture unassuming. Every few seconds someone would glance at him and then look away. No one stopped him, no one questioned his presence. He was invisible. Exactly as planned. Near the break room, the volume of conversation grew louder. Laughter echoed down the hallway. Jerome slowed his steps and moved closer, careful not to draw attention. He leaned subtly against the wall, just out of view, his ears catching bits and pieces of the exchange. "Man, did you see that guy out in the lot? Barnes lit him up. And spit on him, dude, right in the face. Thought that bum was about to cry." More laughter. Jerome closed his eyes briefly. The bile in his throat rose. Not because they had mocked him, but because this was normal for them. This wasn't an outburst. It was culture. A well-oiled machine built on humiliation, control, and unchecked power. He stepped away from the wall and entered the break room. 4 officers were huddled around a table, 2 standing, 2 seated, all mid-laugh. One of them, young, fit, and with an energy that screamed, "New guy," was mimicking the scene in the parking lot, dramatically reenacting Barnes's tone and posture. "Get out of here, scum," he barked, overacting his voice to loud chuckles. Then they saw Jerome. Silence. He could feel their eyes on his clothes, trying to place him. Civilian, custodian, homeless. Jerome said nothing. He walked to the vending machine, inserted $1, and pressed the button for a bottle of water. The machine whirred noisily. The silence remained. He turned around slowly, bottle in hand, and looked at each of them, one by one. Not a single face held eye contact for more than a second. Without a word, he left the break room. Further down the hall, he found a bulletin board lined with announcements, most of them yellowed with age. A few were recruitment posters. One had a motivational quote about integrity taped to the top. "Respect is earned through action, not title." Jerome raised an eyebrow. The irony stung. As he studied the board, a voice spoke behind him. "Hey, excuse me, sir, can I help you with something?" Jerome turned. A woman stood before him, uniformed, early 30s, clear-eyed and sharp, though her expression held the weariness of someone who'd had to watch her back for too long. Her name tag read, Reyes. Jerome smiled, just waiting for someone, not in a rush. She looked him over. "Are you new around here? Civilian ride-along, or?" He shook his head. "No, just here for the briefing." She raised an eyebrow. "You got the wrong side of the building for that." Jerome nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I was told that, but I figured I'd look around first, get a feel for the place." Reyes hesitated. There was something about his tone, firm but friendly, that didn't match his appearance. She opened her mouth to ask more but was cut off by a voice over the intercom. "All personnel to the briefing room. Immediate attendance required. Ray's tilted her head. Looks like it's showtime. You coming? Jerome gave her a half smile. I wouldn't miss it. The briefing room was buzzing as Jerome entered from a side door. Dozens of officers were already seated or milling about, chatting, joking, sipping from foam coffee cups. A few were scrolling their phones. At the front stood Captain Martin, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, mustache neat, posture military straight. Jerome stayed in the shadows for a moment, watching the room. There was Barnes, leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, smug expression firmly in place. There were the same men from the break room, now quiet, composed, acting like they hadn't just been laughing about assaulting a stranger. Jerome stepped forward. Martin cleared his throat. All right, settle down. We've got an important announcement. Chatter faded. As you all know, Chief Holloway retired last month. We've been operating under interim leadership, but that changes today. It is my honor to introduce your new Chief of Police. He comes to us with over 2 decades of experience, an impeccable record, and a commitment to restoring integrity in law enforcement. He gestured to the side door. Jerome stepped forward. A silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. Every pair of eyes locked on him. Some widened in shock, others flickered with confusion, disbelief, embarrassment. Barnes's face went pale. Jerome placed a folder on the lectern. His movement was calm, intentional. He looked across the room, locking eyes with those who had laughed, those who had mocked, and those who had simply stood by. Good morning, he said, voice even. My name is Jerome Carter. As of today, I am your new Chief of Police. No one moved. Jerome continued. This morning I arrived in plain clothes, not because I was unsure of my role, but because I wanted to see yours, unfiltered, unrehearsed. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some lowered their gazes. What I saw was not professionalism. It was not brotherhood. It was arrogance. It was abuse. It was failure. He paused, letting the words sink. I was spit on in your parking lot. I was mocked in your break room, and no one stopped it. Jerome leaned forward slightly. This department is broken, but I didn't come here to put on a show or make speeches. I came here to rebuild, with or without you. A heavy silence. Then, effective immediately, Officer Barnes is suspended pending internal review. Gasps. Jerome wasn't done. And if anyone else believes they can operate in this department without integrity, walk out now. No one moved. But no one smiled, either. Jerome's eyes swept the room. This isn't about rank, it's about respect, and if that makes some of you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is the beginning of change. He closed the folder and stepped away from the podium. The room didn't clap. It didn't cheer. It listened. And for Jerome Carter, that was enough, for now. The briefing room emptied in waves, but the usual buzz of conversation was conspicuously absent. Gone were the jokes, the jabs, the casual arrogance. In their place, silence, thick and suffocating. Officers averted their eyes as they passed Jerome Carter, some nodding stiffly, others moving by like ghosts, unsure of where they stood now. Jerome remained in the room alone for a few minutes, facing the wall of blank stares that had only moments ago met his truth with disbelief. He exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling into his shoulders like armor. This was not victory. This was only the first step in a war against something far more insidious than misconduct: complacency. He closed the folder on the lectern and tucked it under his arm. From the hallway, footsteps echoed softly against tile. Captain Martin stepped through the open door, hands in his pockets, brow slightly furrowed. "Well," Martin said, his voice even, "you certainly know how to make an entrance." Jerome gave a tired smile. Subtlety was never going to work here. Martin nodded. "No, probably not. I'll be honest. I didn't expect you to take this approach." "That's the point," Jerome replied. "Neither did they." They walked together down the corridor, past framed photographs of former chiefs, all stern-faced men in pressed uniforms. Jerome glanced at them as they passed. Not one looked like him, not just in skin, but in expression. Their eyes were hard, distant. His gaze carried something different, intention. "So, what's next?" Martin asked. "A full review of Barnes's file," Jerome answered. "I want every complaint, every warning, every quiet conversation he's ever received. I want to know how he stayed in uniform this long." Martin hesitated. "That might rattle a few people. He's connected." Jerome stopped walking and turned toward him. "So am I." Martin gave a half chuckle, then nodded. "Understood." Word spread quickly. By midday, the entire department was aware that Barnes had been suspended and that their new chief wasn't just symbolic, he was surgical. There was no ceremony, no farewell. One of the admin staff quietly escorted Barnes from the premises, his gun and badge handed over like a scarlet letter. Some officers watched from their desks. Others looked away. No one said a word. Jerome spent most of the afternoon walking the building. Not lurking, but being present. He greeted officers by name when he could, asked about their families when he knew them, thanked the dispatch team for their work, complimented the janitor for keeping the place clean despite the grime left by attitude, not shoes. Presence was power, and Jerome made sure his wasn't just felt, it was respected. Later that day, as the sun dipped behind the parking lot fence, Officer Reyes knocked gently on his office door. He looked up from the growing stack of documents on his desk. "Come in." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I just wanted to say thank you," she began, "for what you did this morning." Jerome leaned back in his chair. "You mean calling it what it was?" She nodded. "Most people wouldn't. They'd sweep it, or delay it, make excuses." "I've seen what delay breeds," he said. "Delay is how rot spreads." Reyes looked down, then back at him. "I've been part of it. Not like Barnes, not directly. But I stayed quiet. When I knew better." Jero didn't interrupt. "I laughed at things I shouldn't have. I let comments go. I told myself it wasn't my fight." Her voice wavered just slightly. "But it was. It is." He studied her expression. Vulnerable, but not fragile. There was strength in that honesty. "It starts with acknowledging it," Jerome said. "Then changing it." She exhaled, some weight lifting from her shoulders. "I want to be part of that change, if you'll let me." He gave her a firm nod. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe people could grow. I'll hold you to it." She smiled for the first time. "Good, I want that." As she left, Jerome made a mental note. Reyes was leadership material, not because she was loud, but because she listened and then acted. That night, Jerome stayed later than planned. The precinct emptied slowly, the lights dimming section by section. He sat in his office, reading through old complaints filed against Barnes. What he saw wasn't just troubling, it was infuriating. Excessive use of force, case dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Inappropriate comments during a traffic stop, no action taken. Witness intimidation in a domestic dispute case, filed and forgotten. Dozens of warnings, patterns of behavior, excuses layered with bureaucratic language. It was a roadmap of red flags, all pointing to a culture of looking the other way. Jerome closed the folder and looked out the window. The parking lot was still, quiet, but beneath that stillness was a storm waiting to break, or be broken. He picked up the phone and dialed Martin's line. "Captain," he said when the line clicked, "I want a department-wide listening session set up for next week, mandatory, rotating shifts, every officer attends." Martin hesitated. "That might raise some resistance." Jerome's tone didn't waver. "Let it." The next morning, Jerome was in the station before dawn. He brewed his own coffee, not from the break-room pot, he preferred something stronger. As the officers arrived, they passed him in the hallway. Some nodded, a few greeted him stiffly. Most looked surprised to see him there so early. He was rewriting expectation by example. And slowly, it was working. By noon, 2 more officers had stopped by his office, quietly, unannounced. One asked how to file a report against a fellow officer without fear of retaliation. The other offered to speak to new recruits about what not to do. Small steps, but real ones. Jerome knew that change wouldn't come from a suspension or a single speech. It would come from momentum. And every honest conversation, every act of accountability, was another turn of the wheel. He opened his notepad and scribbled a sentence at the top of the page. Silence protects power. Voice creates change. Then he underlined it. Twice. The news traveled faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, the story had made its way from the station's break room to barber shops, churches, local diners, and high school basketball courts. But it wasn't just about a police chief being spit on or an officer getting suspended. It was about something else. A sense that the rules had changed, and maybe, just maybe, the people were finally being heard. In a small town like Lakebridge, the relationship between the community and the police department had always been tense. Smiles at town events maybe, but behind closed doors, resentment ran deep. There had been too many quiet traffic stops that ended with fear, too many calls dismissed because the caller wasn't a priority, too many teenagers who learned early on that being polite didn't guarantee they'd be treated with respect. So when word spread that a man had walked into the department and been humiliated, only to later reveal he was the new chief, people paid attention. They weren't shocked by what had happened to him. They were shocked that he did something about it. Down on Maple Avenue, an older man named Mr. Lawson, a retired teacher and lifelong resident of Lakebridge, sat at his usual spot on the community center bench. He was mid-conversation with two younger parents when someone brought it up. "You hear about the new chief?" Mr. Lawson nodded. "Yeah, Jerome Carter. He's the one they spit on, right?" "They spit on the wrong one," Mr. Lawson said, his voice low and pointed. "And now, they're gonna learn." Back at the precinct, the ripple effects of Jerome's leadership were beginning to show, but not everyone welcomed them. In a quiet corner of the squad room, 3 officers whispered between calls. "This guy's gonna flip the whole place upside down," one said. "I heard he's pulling files from 5 years back," said another, "trying to get people fired for stuff that was already handled." A third officer leaned in. "Handled or buried?" They fell silent. That was the difference now. People were starting to ask the questions they'd been afraid to ask. Meanwhile, Jerome continued his walkthroughs just like he'd promised. His presence was no longer a surprise, but it still carried tension. People sat straighter, watched their words. At first, it was fear, but slowly, in some corners, it was shifting into awareness. One afternoon, he stopped by the training room where a small group of cadets was watching footage from a de-escalation workshop. The instructor paused when Jerome entered, looking unsure. "Please, go on," Jerome said, taking a seat in the back. The video rolled again. A dramatized routine traffic stop turned aggressive due to poor communication and unchecked ego. The room was silent, watching. When it ended, Jerome raised his hand. What did the officer do wrong? A young cadet hesitated, then said he escalated before he tried to understand the situation. Jerome nodded. That's right. He treated his authority as a weapon, not a responsibility. Another cadet added, he didn't listen. Jerome looked around the room. Listening isn't weakness, he said. It's how we survive, how we protect. If you want to wear this badge, remember this. You serve first, you enforce second. Outside the walls of the station, something else was happening. Parents who once warned their kids to keep their heads down around cops were starting to reconsider. Community leaders who had long given up on reform were taking cautious steps toward the conversation. One of them was Vanessa Turner, a youth pastor at the Grace Chapel on the south side of town. She requested a meeting with Jerome. When he walked into the small church office, she stood to greet him. Her handshake was firm, her eyes guarded. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for asking," Jerome replied. She motioned for him to sit. "I'll be honest, Chief. I didn't think you'd say yes." "I didn't come here to hide," he said. "I came to connect." Vanessa studied him for a moment. "The people around here," she said slowly, "they've been burned. Over and over. Promises, meetings, reports, but nothing really changed. You understand that, right?" "I do," Jerome said. "That's why I'm not making promises. I'm making decisions." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. Suspensions, investigations, policy reviews, mandatory listening sessions. It's already started." She leaned back. "You're gonna make enemies." Jerome didn't flinch. That's fine. I didn't take this job to make friends. Vanessa was quiet, then smiled faintly. I think I believe you. Back at the precinct, Jerome returned to his office and found a sealed envelope on his desk. No name, no markings. He opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Chief Carter, I saw what happened, not just to you, but to all of us who've been told to shut up and follow orders. I was part of the problem. I laughed when I should have walked away. I'm not proud of it, but I want to change. If you'll give me a second chance, I want to earn it. Officer Tr. Jerome read it twice. Then he folded it and placed it in his top drawer. He didn't need to know who wrote it, not yet. What mattered was that someone was listening, someone was feeling again. And that, he knew, was the first sign of transformation. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Jerome walked the perimeter of the precinct alone. He watched as officers left for the day, some in groups, some alone. He nodded to each one, some nodded back. A few even said, "Good night, Chief." It wasn't warmth, but it was movement. Across the street, a group of teenagers sat on a low wall, tossing a basketball back and forth. One of them spotted Jerome, stood up and called out, "Hey, you the new guy?" Jerome smiled. "Depends. You the welcoming committee?" The teen grinned. "Nah, we just wanted to see if the stories were true." Jerome raised an eyebrow. "Which ones?" "The ones where you don't take any crap but you actually listen." Jerome walked closer. "Try me." The group exchanged glances, amused. But something shifted in their body language. Curiosity. Maybe even a flicker of hope. That night, Jerome sat in his office once more. The lights were off, the building was quiet, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he felt the balance begin to tip. Not through orders or power or punishment, but through presence. Because real change doesn't always start with a bang. Sometimes it starts with a whisper. Tension had a scent. Jerome Carter could feel it in the air the moment he stepped into the precinct Monday morning. It wasn't the stale coffee or the faint hint of bleach. It was thicker, heavier, and quieter than before. People still said good morning, but their smiles were tighter, their voices lower. Eyes flicked away quicker than usual. Something had shifted. It didn't take long to confirm the reason. There was a new undercurrent moving through the department. Quiet conversations that stopped when Jerome entered a room, closed-door meetings behind the squad room blinds, and a particular sense of withdrawal from certain clusters of officers, the ones who hadn't spoken to him since the briefing, the ones who had once dominated the room with laughter and loud opinions. Now, they whispered. Captain Martin was the first to address it. He knocked on Jerome's office door just after lunch, his expression unreadable as he stepped inside. "There's talk going around," he said plainly. "Certain officers aren't happy with how Barnes was handled. They're saying it was personal, that you're here to punish, not to lead." Jerome looked up from a report he was reviewing. "Let them talk," he replied calmly. Martin sat down across from him. "I'm not saying they're right, but they're not going to stay quiet. You've disrupted a power structure that's been in place for years. They don't see it as a reset. They see it as a threat." Jerome nodded slowly, absorbing every word. He wasn't surprised, only mildly disappointed that it had taken this long to bubble up. "I didn't come here to reassure people who are afraid of being held accountable," he said. "But I do need to know, are we talking about complaints, resistance, or something more coordinated?" Martin hesitated. That alone was telling. "There's a group," he admitted. "I don't know how formal it is, but they're meeting off hours. I've heard the word petition mentioned. Some are pressuring the union to challenge your authority." Jerome leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Of course they are." Martin's gaze tightened. "I don't want this to become a war, Chief." Jerome shook his head. "It already is. The moment Barnes spit in my face and no one stepped in, that was the line, and now they want to act like I'm the one who crossed it." Martin remained silent, watching him. Jerome continued, "I'm not going to play defense. I'm going to keep moving forward. But I need to know who I can trust." Martin didn't respond immediately. Then, slowly, he said, "You can trust that I'm here for the department, and that means I'm here for the truth, whether or not people like how it sounds." That would have to be enough, for now. By midweek, the rumors had taken shape. Officers were circulating a letter behind closed doors, demanding an external review of Jerome's conduct. The document wasn't official, no signatures yet, but the very existence of it was a declaration. They weren't just angry, they were organizing. Jerome responded not with confrontation, but with action. He doubled down on transparency, posted department policies in common areas, held open-door hours, invited officers, yes, even the quiet critics, to sit down with him and air concerns, off the record. Few took the offer, but the gesture mattered. Meanwhile, the internal review of Barnes's record continued. What it uncovered was worse than Jerome expected. Complaints from civilians, conflicts of interest, reports that had been closed with one-line conclusions and no follow-up. It painted a picture of a man who had learned he was untouchable and a system that had silently agreed. Jerome compiled the findings into a report and submitted it to the city's oversight committee with a personal note attached. This is not a witch hunt, it's an exorcism. But pressure from the inside was building. A senior officer, Lieutenant Griggs, respected, influential, and deeply tied to the old guard, finally made his move. He cornered Jerome in the hallway one afternoon, expression calm but eyes sharp. "We've been talking," Griggs said, "a lot of us." Jerome didn't stop walking. "I'm aware. You're creating division," Griggs continued. "People don't feel safe." "Good," Jerome said without flinching. "They shouldn't feel safe if they've got something to hide." Griggs narrowed his eyes. "You're not here to build a team. You're here to tear one apart." Jerome paused, turned, and faced him squarely. "I'm here to tear down a wall that's been keeping this department from serving the people the way it should. If that scares you, then maybe you were part of the wall." The hallway fell silent. Griggs didn't respond, just stared for a moment longer before turning and walking away. Later that evening, Officer Reyes entered Jerome's office with an envelope. "This was left on my desk," she said. "No name." Jerome opened it. Inside was a photocopy of the petition. No signatures, but all the names were typed. 23 officers, nearly a third of the department. He read it carefully. The language was strategic. Terms like leadership overreach, lack of procedural fairness, and abuse of authority jumped out from the page. They were trying to turn accountability into misconduct. Jerome placed the paper down slowly. "Thank you," he said. Reyes hesitated. "I want you to know, not everyone agrees with this. Some are scared, some are confused, but more of us are watching, waiting." "Waiting for what?" he asked. "For you to show us this isn't just about making an example," she replied, "that it's about building something real." Jerome nodded. "It is, but building something real starts with clearing the rot. That means some dust has to fly." That night Jerome didn't go home. He stayed in his office, reviewing every disciplinary file from the past 5 years. The more he read, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a department that had gone off course. It was a department that had forgotten why it existed in the first place. The next morning, before sunrise, he pinned a quote to the main bulletin board, the same one where faded memos lived beside recruitment posters. The quote read, "Culture is not what you say, it's what you tolerate." He didn't sign his name beneath it. He didn't need to. Everyone would know. The folding chairs in the Lakebridge Community Center creaked under the shifting weight of tension. It was a Thursday evening and the air inside the room was thick, not from humidity, but from the collective expectation of a town ready to speak its mind. At the front, a plastic table with a white cloth had been set up for the officials. Jerome Carter sat in the center, flanked by the mayor, 2 city council members, and Captain Martin. Behind them, a faded mural of Lakebridge's founding fathers loomed large, reminding everyone of the town's long memory and longer grudges. Jerome had agreed to the town hall without hesitation. He didn't ask for a script, didn't request pre-screened questions. "If I'm going to be their chief," he had said, "then I should be able to look them in the eye." Now seated in front of more than 100 residents, all facing him in tightly packed rows, He was preparing to do exactly that. The mayor gave a short, generic introduction about transparency and open dialogue, then handed the mic to a community liaison who stood beside the floor mic, clipboard in hand. "We'll go in order," she said. "Please keep questions brief." The first to speak was an elderly woman in a pink floral dress. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with restrained anger. "How are we supposed to trust a department that never apologized for treating our sons like criminals before they could even vote?" The room murmured in agreement. Jerome leaned forward. "You're right to ask that, and I won't insult you with a scripted apology. What I will say is this: what happened before I arrived was wrong, and what happens from this point forward is my responsibility. I can't undo the past, but I can make sure no one in uniform forgets it or repeats it." A few heads nodded, some crossed their arms more tightly. Trust didn't come with words, it came with time. And this town had been patient far too long. The next person was a teenage boy, no older than 17. He wore a hoodie and kept his hands in his pockets as he approached the mic. "Are you going to fire everyone who doesn't agree with you?" Jerome didn't smile. "No. Disagreement doesn't scare me. Disrespect does. Abuse does. Silence in the face of wrongdoing does. If someone's against me because they think accountability is a threat, then maybe they shouldn't be wearing a badge." The boy gave a slow nod, then returned to his seat without another word. A third speaker, a local shop owner, asked about crime in the area. Petty theft, vandalism, kids loitering around his store at night. Jerome took the question seriously, laying out a plan to partner officers with community members, not just assign more patrol cars. "Policing isn't just responding," he said. "It's being present before things go wrong." Then came a fourth voice, a familiar one. Vanessa Turner, the youth pastor he had met the week before, stepped forward. Her tone was calm, but her words carried weight. "Chief Carter," she said, "I appreciate what you're doing, but this department didn't break in a day, and one good man, no matter how determined, can't fix it alone. So my question is simple. Are you building a movement, or are you standing alone?" The silence in the room sharpened. Jerome looked around before answering. "I'm not interested in playing the hero. This isn't about one person changing a broken system. It's about refusing to accept that the system can't change. I need help, and I need people who believe change is possible, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard." Vanessa met his gaze, then gave a subtle nod of approval. It wasn't an endorsement. It was a challenge accepted. The questions kept coming, some accusatory, some skeptical, some emotional. Jerome answered each one without flinching, without defensiveness. He didn't pretend to have all the solutions. What he had instead was clarity. Respect, transparency, and responsibility weren't optional. They were the new baseline. By the time the evening ended, the tension hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. The room didn't feel hostile. It felt awake. Outside, after the chairs were stacked and the lights dimmed, Jerome stood near the exit, shaking hands with those who stayed behind. An older man in a veteran's jacket pulled him aside. "I served," the man said. "I know command isn't about power. It's about knowing when to listen." He paused, then added, "Tonight, you listen." Jerome thanked him, then turned to find Captain Martin watching from a distance. The two men exchanged a glance. No words were needed. The evening had done what reports and memos couldn't. It had cracked something open. Later, back at the precinct, Jerome sat at his desk and stared at the town map pinned to the wall. Every neighborhood, every block, every forgotten corner. Places with names he hadn't learned yet, but pain he could already feel. He picked up a marker and drew a small red dot over the south end, near the community center. Then another in the west, where the most complaints had originated. Then the north, near the high school. 3 points, one triangle. He stared at it for a moment, then wrote beside it, "Start here." This wasn't about waiting for the culture to change. It was about planting seeds where it mattered most. Among the youth, among the ignored, among the people who had every reason to stop believing. His phone buzzed, a text from Officer Reyes. "The town's talking, in a good way, first time in a long time." He typed back, "Let them, we've been silent too long." For the first time since stepping into Lakebridge, Jerome felt the town not pulling away, but leaning in. Not fully, not blindly, but with curiosity. And that, in a place like this, was the beginning of something powerful. Not redemption, but rebuilding. It started with a memo, one page, double-spaced, titled simply, Department-Wide Reorientation Initiative. The content was straightforward. Every active officer, regardless of rank or years of service, was to attend a mandatory training program over the next 30 days. The sessions would focus on ethical policing, de-escalation, bias recognition, and public communication. Attendance was not optional. Recertification would be tied to continued employment. No exemptions, no shortcuts. Jerome Carter signed it himself and posted it first thing Monday morning. One copy in the briefing room, one on the break room door, and one on the department-wide email list. He expected pushback. What he didn't expect was silence. The kind of silence that wrapped around the station like fog. Not loud, not angry, but heavy, calculated, like the calm before something breaks. For the first 2 days, no one approached him directly, not even the usual skeptics. Officers passed him in the hallway with clipped nods if they acknowledged him at all. The usual small talk evaporated. The energy in the building shifted from cold skepticism to a kind of disciplined disengagement, a quiet protest in plain sight. Jerome didn't flinch. He showed up to each training session on time, sometimes sitting in the back, sometimes standing silently by the door. He wasn't there to command attention, he was there to watch. Who leaned in? Who rolled their eyes? Who took notes? Who didn't bother? The results were mixed. Some younger officers, like Reyes, and a few new recruits responded positively, asking real questions, challenging scenarios in good faith. But veterans like Griggs? They sat stiffly, arms crossed, expressions blank. Some didn't even hide their disdain. During one session, Griggs muttered loud enough for a row to hear, "We're wasting time learning how to be soft, instead of learning how to stay alive." The room didn't laugh, but no one pushed back either. Jerome noted the moment, not for retaliation, but for pattern recognition. By the end of the first week, 40% of the department had completed their first module. Jerome's office compiled anonymous feedback from each group. Some comments were constructive, others were venom, thinly veiled as critique. One read, "You can't fix what's not broken. He's trying to turn us into social workers." Another, "This is about power. He's trying to erase our way of life." That line stuck with Jerome. Not because it was true, but because it was revealing. Their way of life wasn't just about procedure, it was identity, brotherhood, ritual. And Jerome wasn't just changing their tasks, he was threatening their sense of belonging. That's why they feared him. And that fear was becoming fertile ground for something else. The following Monday, a video surfaced online. It wasn't leaked through official channels. It appeared first on a private Facebook group used by former officers and sympathizers. Then it spread to local forums, conservative blogs, and community inboxes. The video was grainy, handheld, clearly shot without permission. It showed one of the training sessions. The camera focused on Jerome as he addressed a group of officers about implicit bias and racial profiling. His tone was steady, firm, the kind of message any decent reform leader might deliver. But the clip was edited, cut mid-sentence, framed to sound like Jerome was accusing all white officers of systemic racism. The caption beneath the video read, "New chief accuses his own officers of racism. Is this who we want protecting Lakebridge?" By morning, Jerome's inbox was full. Half a dozen emails from residents, some confused, some angry, some clearly baiting him for a public response. Captain Martin stormed into his office, eyes wide with disbelief. "You see this yet?" Jerome nodded. It was inevitable. Martin dropped a printed comment thread on the desk. "They're calling for your resignation." Jerome picked it up. He scanned through posts accusing him of dividing the town, creating anti-police hysteria, and disgracing the uniform. He placed the paper down, calm, unshaken. Martin stared. "You're not going to address it?" "I will," Jerome said, "but not with panic." "That's what they want." Martin exhaled, pacing. "Chief, this is bigger than the department now. They're pulling your words out of context. They're spinning this like you're some outsider sent to destroy us from within." Jerome looked him dead in the eye. "Then maybe they should stop pretending the us isn't part of the problem." Martin flinched, but didn't argue. Later that day, Jerome held a press briefing in the department's multi-purpose room. He stood alone at the podium, no security, no political allies, just him and a dozen local journalists, along with half the department watching from the back. He didn't read a prepared statement. He spoke from the gut. Yes, the video is real, so are the words, but what's not real is the narrative it's being twisted to fit. I didn't accuse officers of racism. I reminded them of our duty to treat every citizen with fairness, regardless of color, background, or zip code. If that offends anyone, then maybe the uniform means something different to them than it does to me." He paused, letting the silence speak. "This department is under transformation, and transformation is uncomfortable, but discomfort is not oppression. Accountability is not betrayal. If you think asking officers to examine their bias is an attack, ask yourself why that question hits so hard." He stepped away from the podium. No dramatic mic drop, no applause, but no one dared speak against it. In the back row, Officer Reyes nodded once. It was all Jerome needed to see. That night he walked the darkened halls of the precinct alone. Posters still hung from training announcements, feedback boxes sat half full, a few lights flickered overhead. He paused near the break room, now silent, and stared at the whiteboard someone had wiped clean earlier that day. For a long time it had carried inside jokes, crude sketches, passive-aggressive notes. Now it was blank, waiting. Jerome picked up a dry erase marker and wrote 2 words at the top. "Earn this." Then he put the cap back on, turned off the light, and walked out. The smell hit Jerome before he saw it, acrid, sharp, burning plastic and scorched paper. It was just after 6 a.m. when he unlocked the side entrance of the precinct, a habit now, arriving before anyone else. He'd barely taken 2 steps into the hallway when the scent stopped him cold. Something was wrong. He followed the trail instinctively, his pace quickening with each step. It led him to the training room. The door was half open, and the lights were off. He reached for the switch. The room flooded with cold white light, and what he saw made his stomach knot. The training table at the front of the room had been scorched. Not completely destroyed, but damaged enough to send a message. On top of the blackened surface lay a half-melted projector, a pile of singed paper handouts, and in the center, in thick, ugly letters drawn in spray paint across the wall behind it, the words, "We don't need fixing." Jerome didn't react with anger. He didn't call anyone. Not right away. He stood there in silence for a full minute, letting the weight of the scene settle over him. This wasn't vandalism from the outside, no forced entry, no cameras tripped. Whoever had done this had access, had time, and knew exactly what it meant. He walked out of the room and went straight to Captain Martin's office. Martin arrived only minutes later. Jerome met him at the door without a word and motioned him to follow. When they stepped into the training room, Martin froze. "Jesus," he muttered. "They did this here?" "Overnight," Jerome said. "No security alert, no sign-in logs disturbed. This was planned." Martin stepped forward, eyeing the damage. Could have been a warning, or just rage. Jerome shook his head. It was a statement. Martin looked over at the spray-painted wall, then back at him. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing yet," Jerome replied. "Not publicly, not until I know who I'm dealing with." That afternoon, Jerome called a closed-door meeting with the senior officers. No press, no community leaders, just department staff. 30 officers filed into the large conference room. Some curious, some guarded. A few with arms crossed before they even sat down. Jerome stood at the front without a mic. His voice didn't need amplification. "There was an incident last night," he began. "Some of you may have heard, others haven't. I'll make it simple. Our training room was vandalized, equipment damaged, property defaced." No one said a word. Jerome continued. "This wasn't random. It was someone with access, someone who wanted to make it clear that they reject the direction this department is moving." He let the statement hang. The silence that followed wasn't guilt. It was calculation. I'm not here to accuse anyone in this room, but I am here to say this. If you think this kind of behavior is a protest, you're mistaken. It's cowardice, and it won't stop what's coming." Murmurs rose in the back row. Jerome stepped closer. "You don't have to like me. You don't even have to agree with everything I do. But the moment you sabotage this department from the inside, you become the problem we are trying to solve." No one moved. Then, from the far left of the room, a voice spoke. "This isn't the department we signed up for, Chief." All eyes turned to the speaker, Lieutenant Griggs. Jerome didn't blink. "Then maybe you need to remember what you did sign up for." Griggs leaned back, arms crossed. "I signed up to protect this town, not get lectured on how to apologize for it." Jerome took a slow step forward. "Then tell me, Lieutenant, who exactly is asking you to apologize for protecting people? Because what I see is a team being asked to reflect, to grow, and the ones resisting, they're not defending honor, they're defending comfort." The tension in the room thickened. Griggs said nothing more, but he didn't look away. Jerome scanned the room one last time. "This isn't about politics. It's about principle. If you believe in what we swore to protect, then prove it. Don't burn rooms in the dark, stand in the light, speak with your name." He turned and left without waiting for applause. There wouldn't have been any. That night, Jerome reviewed camera logs, visitor logs, and personnel entries for the previous 24 hours. As expected, nothing stood out. Clean records, no alerts. But that didn't mean the threat wasn't real. Because now, it wasn't just resistance. It was sabotage. The next morning, Jerome arrived to find the training room cleaned, the spray paint scrubbed off, the table replaced, a new projector installed. He asked the custodian who did it. The man shrugged. "It was already done when I got here." Later that day, Reyes stopped by his office. She didn't ask permission to enter, just stepped in and closed the door. "I know who cleaned it," she said. "It was Thompson, rookie, quiet. Nobody asked him. He just showed up at 5 with a mop and a trash bag." Jerome looked up from his desk. "Did he say why?" Reyes nodded. "Said he didn't want to work in a place where people were too afraid to stand for something. Said he thought someone should fix what someone else tried to destroy." "Jontham." Jerome didn't speak for a moment. Then he said quietly, "That's how it starts." The room was small, but the tension made it feel crowded. The Lakebridge City Council chambers, usually half empty for zoning debates or budget reviews, was now packed with reporters, local activists, retired officers, and uneasy citizens sitting shoulder to shoulder. At the center table sat Jerome Carter, dressed in his formal uniform for the first time since taking office. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but his expression was measured, calm, but ready. The council had called an emergency session, the official reason being community concerns regarding departmental leadership. But everyone knew what it was really about. The video, the backlash, the vandalism, the growing divide. Jerome had started a fire, and now the town wanted to know if it should let it burn or put it out. Councilman Blake, the longest-serving member and a known skeptic of Jerome's appointment, cleared his throat. "Chief Carter, thank you for attending. We've received dozens of letters from residents, officers, and local businesses. Some praise your changes, others don't. We're here to determine whether your leadership is serving the best interests of this city." Jerome nodded. "Understood." Councilwoman Patel, younger and newly elected, leaned forward. "There's no question the department needed reform. But some say your methods are too aggressive. Mandatory retraining, suspensions, internal investigations. You've made waves, but are you building bridges?" Jerome's voice was steady. "Bridges don't stand unless the foundation is solid. I'm not here to repaint the department. I'm here to rebuild it, and rebuilding is noisy." There was a pause before Councilman Blake interjected. "The problem, Chief, is that some people say you've become the problem, that you're dividing the force, damaging morale, creating distrust between officers and the people they're sworn to protect." Jerome looked him in the eye. "No, Councilman, I'm exposing the distrust that was already there, hidden beneath routine and silence. The morale that's shaken is the false kind, the kind built on unchecked power and unearned loyalty. Real morale comes from integrity, from earning the public's trust, and that starts inside these walls. The audience murmured. Blake frowned, but didn't interrupt again. Councilwoman Patel spoke next. If we put this to a vote, symbolic or not, do you believe you still have the confidence of this community? Jerome stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture. He simply spoke the truth. I didn't come here to make people comfortable. I came here because people had stopped believing this department could change. And if you take this badge from me tonight, I'll walk out with my integrity. But if you keep me in this seat, then I promise you this. Every day I wear this uniform, I will hold this department to a higher standard, and I will do it openly, unapologetically, and without fear. He sat down. The room was silent. Then the mayor leaned forward, voice low but clear. Let's vote. Each council member cast their vote aloud. Councilwoman Patel? Yes, retain. Councilman Ortega? Yes. Councilwoman Lang? No. Councilman Blake? A tie. All eyes turned to the mayor. He hesitated, then said, yes, retain. Applause broke out, not from everyone, but from enough people to fill the chamber with hope. Jerome didn't smile. He simply nodded, stood up and walked out, knowing this wasn't a win, it was a warning. The war wasn't over, but he'd won the right to keep fighting. The hallway was empty, the kind of stillness that only came after dark. Jerome Carter stood alone, his hand resting gently against the doorframe of the main squad room. Inside, the lights were dimmed, the desks quiet, the noise of the day long faded into silence. And yet, he didn't move. He just stood there, listening. Not for sounds, but for absence. Absence of mockery, of whispers, of defiance. For the first time since he'd walked through those doors undercover, the building felt clean. Earlier that day, Officer Reyes had dropped off a stack of evaluations from the final reorientation session. She said nothing, just left the file on his desk and gave him a nod. Later, Jerome flipped through the papers, expecting more of the same resistance. But between the typical short answers, something stood out. A line scribbled in the margin of one anonymous form. 6 words, underlined twice. I still don't like you, but I get it now. That, Jerome thought, was progress. Not perfection, not applause, but understanding. Outside the precinct, the town hadn't changed overnight. There were still complaints, still tension, still trust to rebuild. But now, when Jerome walked the streets, people didn't look away. Some nodded, some waved, a few stopped him, not to criticize, but to talk. One afternoon at a youth center downtown, a boy no older than 10 tugged at his uniform. "Are you the chief?" he asked. Jerome knelt beside him and smiled. "I am." The boy looked down, then back up. "My mom says, you're different." Jerome's voice softened. "I hope so." And in that moment, for all the votes, the files, the tension, and silence, that simple exchange felt like the most honest review he could ever receive. Later that week, Jerome erased the whiteboard in the break room himself. The words "earn this" had faded over time. He replaced them with something new. "We're not here to be perfect, we're here to be better than yesterday." No signature, no speech, just a message. And this time, no one erased it. Sometimes, real change doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence, followed by action. Jerome Carter didn't set out to be a hero. He didn't ask for the spotlight. He simply chose to do what was right when it was hardest. And in doing so, he reminded us that leadership isn't about power, it's about presence, about showing up, listening, standing firm when it's easier to walk away. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and let us know in the comments. What would you do if you were in Jerome's position? And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, stories of strength, growth, and quiet bravery, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We've got more coming. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing in better.